And that's where the book that I wrote came from. It's called The Tao of the Polyvagal Theory. And I blended polyvagal theory in with my manual applications, working with the viscera and the nervous system, and then overlaid a lot of the information about the spirit that we get from Asian medical theory and about how emotions travel through the body, and just created this bridge through that. Polyvagal theory actually is the bridge for me in a lot of ways. And it was able to advance my practice so much. And I ended up applying really concentrated anatomy and physiology and with that more esoteric Eastern modalities that I've learned over the years. And they really started to come together through that. And I had to shift a little bit of classical Asian medical theory to help meet that modern time of the anatomy and physiology and actual scientific research we've done. And it all just really linked up amazingly well. And the knowledge that the polyvagal theory brought into that really was the nuance that the work needed to kind of come to cohesion.
Welcome to the Reframe, where fear is brave. Here, you will learn tools, techniques, and strategies to get back in the driver's seat of your own life so you can access more vitality and energy to do the things that you love, deepen your relationship with others as well as yourself, and show up every day as the person you know you are meant to be. I am your host, Rebecca Molman, trauma therapist turned coach. Through the lens of five-element and polyvagal theory, Nicole elegantly uses the example of grief to highlight the different organ systems' inherent qualities and how they might respond when in as well as out of balance. This impacts how we process emotion. Bridging the latest science with ancient healing techniques, she brings new insight into the mental, physical, and emotional healing realm. There is so much to learn today, and it is my absolute pleasure to bring you Nicole Keane.
Nikki, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. And I know that our conversation is going to be one of my favorites because it's around the nervous system and a new book that you have that's come out. But could you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell everybody about maybe who you are and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation as well. My name is Nicole Keane, or Nikki, and I have been studying manual therapy and bodywork since 2002 in my undergrad physical therapy program. And I went to massage therapy school after that and didn't immediately dive into bodywork as full-time career until about 2010. And in that time, I researched and studied a lot of nutrition information. I was an environmental scientist for a little while in my career path and worked in policy work and started studying about five-element theory and Asian medical theory. And I've also studied religions, Eastern religions and Western religions for quite some time growing up and in university. So pulling that all together over the past concentrated 13 years of study of the anatomy and physiology of the body with my practice in manual therapy of myofascial release, unwinding, visceral manipulation, neural manipulation, emotional release, cranial osteopathic techniques, and different soft tissue mobilization techniques. I've kind of pulled it all together and reconnected with some of the more ancient methods of theory that have been used in traditional healing methods for a long time. And when I've been studying about them and applying them in my clinical practice through my observations, I just have discovered and observed that some of the things that I had learned didn't really apply exactly to what I was feeling and experiencing in the tissue systems of the body of my clients. So I really started thinking outside the box, and the pandemic gave me some time to take a step back, a little bit of a sabbatical from full-time work, and I could actually really think about what I was feeling because I had clients for a while that were in Oriental medicine and really familiar with how the energy moves in the body and the chi flows. And they would say, how are you getting such transformation so quickly? And I feel the chi moving, but how are you working with this? And it was all just me observing their body. Well, I really got to step back and take a look and think about it. And that's where the book that I wrote came from. It's called The Tao of the Polyvagal Theory. And I blended polyvagal theory in with my manual applications, working with the viscera and the nervous system, and then overlaid a lot of the information about the spirit that we get from Asian medical theory and about how emotions travel through the body, and just created this bridge through that. Polyvagal theory actually is the bridge for me in a lot of ways. And it was able to advance my practice so much. And I ended up applying really concentrated anatomy and physiology, and with that, more esoteric Eastern modalities that I've learned over the years. And they really started to come together through that. And I had to shift a little bit of classical Asian medical theory to help meet that modern time of the anatomy and physiology and actual scientific research we've done. And it all just really linked up amazingly well. And the knowledge that the polyvagal theory brought into that really was the nuance that the work needed to kind of come to cohesion. And as the polyvagal theory really made what we know about the autonomic nervous system more nuanced, just with regard to our parasympathetic responses within our body as far as physiological processes and emotions, the nuance that brought to the table can be reflected in the nuance that we now can see in what we know about the body and all of these ancient methods that have been used for forever and been really healing for people. But Western medicine just doesn't understand them. We have this path now moving forward to say, okay, well, it's not, really clear on the outset, but how can we bring it together? And we can bring it together through that modern research and actual science-based information. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's amazing. And a much needed bridge where I think we're really headed in that direction of bridging the old ways with the new science is catching up with what the old ways have already had for thousands of years. Can you describe, just for the listeners, what the polyvagal theory is and how it has deepened our understanding of the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system specifically?
Yeah, so I use the polyvagal theory in my work as a manual therapist in kind of a different way. Predominantly, I think of it as the vagus nerve as a neural structure, and the vagus nerve complex is regulating our autonomic nervous system. So it's a little bit different. My perspective comes a little bit different from a normal talk therapist would, that uses the theory a lot in their emotional communications with their clients. So really the concept of the bidirectional communication that the vagus nerve offers from the brain to the viscera and from the viscera to the brain is the foundation of that application. And we can affect the mind through working with visceral restrictions and releasing visceral restrictions. And then also we learned that the mind can affect visceral restrictions and nervous system tension and autonomic dysregulation in the actual body. So the way that I use the polyvagal theory and how I define it is kind of in that complex of a really hands-on physical application, which is quite a bit different than what you in your talk therapy discipline would think of it as. But overarching when working with people that have a trauma history, I love the quote by Dr. Stephen Porges who developed the polyvagal theory, that when we are in a state of gratitude, we're bathed in cues of safety. And it's really interesting to me because I just started learning about polyvagal theory probably in the mid 2000 teens and really applying it into my practice in visceral and neural manipulation from that point on. Kind of, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And my clinical practice that I started in 2010, before I even knew about polyvagal theory, was called Gratitude Healing Arts. And it just seemed like a really natural incorporation into my practice. And, since then, my practice has evolved, and using the treatment theories I've developed that blend polyvagal theory, but also the 5-element Asian meridian theories that I've written about, I've evolved that into back to my orthopedic work. So I'm kind of coming full circle now, where I started in myofascial release, went into visceral and neural manipulation and the nuances of that, and more osteopathic style hands-on body work. And now I'm coming back into more orthopedic work and applying the principles of the work that I've researched and observed and really refined over the past couple of years into that orthopedic work, and getting really amazing transformations with people. And a lot of orthopedic conditions can be traced into emotional distress patterns that have kind of chronically built upon each other over years. And then also orthopedic injury, acute injury, can also have a significant emotional component. So working in the energy system with that awareness just is so essential to get really complete healing in those conditions.
Could you give us some examples of what orthopedic issues might be presenting? Like what that would look like? Because when
Yeah.
I hear orthopedic, I think bones.
hmm Yeah, so orthopedic issues they can be joint mobility, joint pain, joint mobilization issues, postural issues. When we think of orthopedics, we think, people that need surgeries for injuries and things like that, but it can be any kind of pain or discomfort, chronic or acute, that you're having in your physical system. And usually it's centered around joints or the spine. And for instance, I had a woman who was in her mid 60s had come to me, and she had this bent over posture, and it was an issue, classical representation of a psoas issue, pain that wraps from the back around the belt line towards the front. She was hunched over so that psoas was tightened. The psoas is the muscle that runs from the spine down into the pelvic area and then attaches into your femur. So it's the muscle that lifts your leg, but it also can pull your torso forward as well. And she had an acute injury. She was working on her fence and it flared this up, and she just couldn't stand up straight after that, was in a lot of pain and discomfort. And I started working with her. It seemed pretty straightforward to begin with. I usually like to work with people from 1 to 5 sessions. So the first session is usually a clearing treatment. I clear the energy system. I do a lot of acupressure, a lot of cranial techniques, and just assess the viscera of the body as well, assess range of motion. And I get a really clear picture of the whole scope of what's going on as far as lesional chains and energy systems that might be restricted and needing cleared, to kind of set the stage and a good foundation for a succession of treatments. And in that first treatment, we got a lot of work done, but I got a good picture of what was going on, and she mentioned to me some other things that were going on with her, and got a clear picture of kind of historical issues that might have led up to this, repetitive injuries and things like that. And then through the course of the 5 treatments, I really started to hone in on restrictions and deepen her pelvis and post-uterine area. And I mentioned that I feel like an energy holding and a stagnation in this area, and I can feel the restriction in her uterus. And she had 2 children over 20 years ago. And she mentioned to me, actually, I can feel right where you're touching. It feels like, I know you're not touching this space, but I can feel it in the back of my pelvis. And that's exactly where my daughter used to kick when I was pregnant with her. Her daughter, who's in her 20s now. And then she got into how this was probably the 3rd or 4th session that we got to this level. And then she got into how her daughter was getting ready to get married, and she was kind of coming to terms with the fact that her children are aging and she's aging and her body's not functioning like she used to. And we talked about that, how, she's then was actually like emotionally going into this crone posture, and the fear associated with aging came up. And the kidneys, which is the organ associated with fear, they sit on top of the psoas. And working in that area, releasing the kidneys then and the psoas. And kidneys are the yin to the bladder yang and the water element. So working with the kidney yin energy helped also release the restrictions in the bladder and uterus area, which is in the same meridian, and helped harmonize the yin and the yang of the water element. And that emotional component that was there was very clear. That aspect of her aging had created the conditions where maybe she did hurt herself when she was working on the fence, but why wasn't she healing from it? Why couldn't she stand up straight afterwards and maybe get away with a little bit of discomfort for a couple days and walk it off, or have one typical kind of massage and it be all good after? She had been in this hunched over position that was getting worse for months. So after that, she really sped up, and we started to see incredible improvements. And I always say 95-ish, approximately 95, 90% of my clients get 80 to 100% better in 1 to 5 sessions for the issue that they came in to see me with, whether it be an emotional issue of stress and their body just can't down-regulate, or a physical orthopedic issue or something like this is going on. Because I spend that time with them, and through the treatment theories I've developed, and working with the autonomic nervous system and honoring how the emotions of the body come in and sit in the physical tissues. And it's just really effective, and people heal and they get better and they stay better.
Because the emotional content that was creating the dysfunction in the physical body has had the opportunity to be released and then re-stabilized, that area restabilized.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you've seen in the human body and through the studies that you've done and the trainings you put together on the emotions, and where are there certain areas that emotions tend to land in the body more than others? And maybe how can the listener work with emotions that they can tell are stuck? Because I think there's some that get really festering, and we kind of intuitively know that there's a dysfunction or a disharmonization in a certain area, and is maybe if there's just a tool that they could use to help move that through their system.
Yeah, well, the curriculum I developed is called Elemental Manual Meridian Theory and Techniques, and it comprehensively teaches manual therapy in the perspective of the five elements. So, and we'll go through the all the elements and kind of get more nuts and bolts into it, I think, a little bit later. Energy and emotion really travels through the body in different ways depending on the emotion and depending on the trauma that created it and the stress levels of the body and the health of the nervous system, and if there's any visceral restrictions that are impeding that flow of energy. So it's really hard to say without a specific kind of instance. I write about in my
Hmm.
book many different ways with all the different organs and all the different elements that things can move through or get stuck, and how the body naturally processes and what needs to happen to help alleviate when there is stagnation. And I go through that with each of the elements. Specifically, one that I write about in particular is the process of grief, because grief is a really multidimensional process that people go through for all kinds of different things. And it can be pretty prolific, and it sort of just takes the time that it's going to take. However, if your nervous system is resilient, you can move through it more quickly or more completely than someone who has less of a resilient nervous system. And that does have to deal with potentially visceral restrictions as well. So it's not only how your nervous system developed as a child and the innate resilience that you have, but it could also be if you had a laparoscopic surgery in your abdomen and your dorsal vagal nervous system, the dorsal vagal nerve fibers are restricted in some area, that can predispose you to be more stuck and not able to process and let go of things. So there is just really, it's very multidimensional. But grief in particular is an emotion associated with the metal element and the lungs. And it's pretty easy to talk about, but really hard to talk about at the same time because people have such a different perspective and experience of it. But the yin is the yin of the lungs, which is the lungs are the yin organ of the metal element, to the yang organ, which is the large intestine. The lungs are an organ that takes in our world. So it takes in our experiences, it takes in the air from our world. And the yin organ of the lungs also has a yang component that eliminates things as well. So you're eliminating toxins from your bloodstream and your body through expiration of the air that you're breathing. And so that whole physiological process is also related to grief in an emotional way. So when we grieve, we take in experiences, we internalize them sometimes, we learn from them, we take in the nutrients that we need, and then ideally we let the rest go and we don't hold on to it. And if we're not able to do that, for instance, if our lungs are unhealthy or if we have a predisposition to somewhat of a dorsal vagal freeze response, which is also associated with the metal element, I write about that in the book, then we might sit with it and it becomes more of a concentrated density. So I actually write about the metal element in my book and my curriculum as metal and air. Air was an element associated with a lot of four element traditions, and the tradition I follow is five
Hmm.
element added into the wood element with the other four elements. But I also really respect and appreciate a lot of the attributes of the air process and place that it holds in the four element tradition. So I write about the metal and the air element continuously throughout my book and curriculum that I developed. And I really feel like that's a necessity because ideally, especially in the process of grief, we're treating it like air, like how Pema Chodron says, we are the sky and everything else is the weather. We want to be there observing it, but not let it get down into us. But if we are unable to release it, then the large intestine can aid in that, in the yang aspects of the metal element. And the large intestine is associated with retaining the last bits of nutrients that we get with our food and hydration, and then eliminating the rest. So at that point, then the large intestine can be associated also with rumination and really turning it over and being in your head a lot about what you're experiencing, not able to let it go, and it sits in that organ system energetically. And then if we're healthy enough, eventually it processes and it passes through us. And in situations where that system within the metal element of retaining, learning, growing, and letting go and releasing, if that's not a healthy process inside that concentrated system, then the grief can actually start to precipitate through the body in somewhat unhealthy ways and affect other aspects of our emotional system. So I view grief in particular as a spectrum, and the fact that it's associated with the lungs is interesting because the diaphragm is what supports the lungs, and the diaphragm can be seen as a spectrum. On one side of it, on the left side, we have the spleen attached to the diaphragm, which is in the earth element. On the other side of the diaphragm, the right side, we have the liver, which is associated with the wood element. And the emotions associated with those organs in particular can also span a spectrum. And traditionally, the liver is associated with anger. And it's the yin organ of the wood element, which the yang organ is the gallbladder. The gallbladder is traditionally associated with irritation. So we kind of feel one and the same with those two oftentimes. If we have a latent anger, we have irritation that pops up and flares for us. And the spleen being the yin organ of the earth element, the yang organ is the stomach. And that energy system has to do with self-support and how we view ourselves. So the stomach as an organ holds the energy of how we experience ourselves in relation to others, pretty much. And it's a big component of the ego. And the spleen in itself is how we nurture ourselves. It's the yin, really beautiful organ of how we show up for ourselves and how we occupy our space, how we occupy ourselves. And the emotions associated with that are of a future that possibly is a rumination also as well, of like maybe a future that never was, or something we're longing for. It's an emotion of sort of longing, feeling like we don't have enough if it's unhealthy. If it's healthy, we're self-supported and we feel like we can show up for ourselves and we are enough. So when grief starts to flow through that system, it really starts to affect those two sides of the spectrum. Am I healthy? Am I enough? Do I support and love myself? How am I going to nurture myself and process this in a healthy way? Am I showing up for myself in a healthy way? Being one side of the spectrum, to the other side of the spectrum being resentment and anger. And we see that with grief, that it flows through the body and it can create those instances of resentment and anger, or feeling less than, feeling like you're not supported, feeling like you can't work through the trials and tribulations that you're experiencing and the cause of the grief that you're processing. And then if those two organ systems can't deal with releasing it through their connections with the large intestine, through acupressure and physical fascial connections, then the grief will settle into the kidneys. And then it becomes really triggering for existential fear and our life force energy, basically. And it can really zap us of energy, deplete us in really extreme ways if we aren't able to process. And it's a years long process of internalizing emotion and can result in that. And then if left in the kidneys too long, I write about this in my book as well, it can actually be transferred epigenetically through generations, through the associations with the life force energy that's given to the next generation and the connections physiologically and quantum connections through the kidney, the bladder, the uterus, and the water element in general. And it's really interesting because we all hear and know that water gives life. Well, it can give life in different energetic form. And that's why it's really important that we all do our work in this lifetime to heal energetically from the things that we experience and try to show up for ourselves in the best way possible with a really healthy earth element. And how that all interplays together in that 5 element perspective, as well as how the polyvagal theory shows up in 5 element perspective, is written about in the book. And I go through all the different phases of dorsal vagal dominance, freeze response, the spectrum of freeze response, sympathetic dominance, the spectrum of activation and fight or flight, and then ventral vagal resilience as well, and how that really holographically relates into the tissue systems of the body through the Asian meridian system, which is pretty impressive and spectacular when you really start to get to know it.
There's so much wisdom that you've knit together in a very beautiful way that I think it could possibly feel even overwhelming a little bit to be able to wrap your head around all of it. I have a pretty good just for myself, pretty good understanding of the nervous system. It's very much how I move through my practice as nervous system centric. But then as I was reading through your book, it was like there was texture and nuance that was woven into my understanding of the nervous system through that 5 element theory. And it gave it much more depth. So I love that you've found a way to bridge those two. And I'm wondering, is it, because it is so comprehensive and there is so much information, is that something that the course would be able to walk you through to where you could, at the end of the course, feel really confident in being able to use this not only in your own life, but engage with other people around you? Who is this course really for? I
Yeah,
guess is what
so
I'm asking.
yeah, thank you. And thank you for the compliments. I really tried to provide the information in the book in a very artistic and accessible and welcoming way for people. And even the book is full color, and I get a lot of comments from my clients that, especially the ones with migraines, that they actually enjoy looking at it, that the contrast isn't hard for them to see. And then clients will say they just enjoy the fact that they can lay the book open and it feels soft and the pages are soft and the illustrations are interesting to look at. And all the illustrations I did are also part of the healing process that's initiated through reading the book and moving that energy within yourself. And the book it's very complex subjects matter, but it's meant to create a conversation within you. And I think people that read it coming from any kind of discipline or perspective, they can get something out of it. And then they can read it again after they've experienced more of the world and potentially use the theories in their clinical practice, whatever it may be, and then get more out of it. And it's not such a large book either. So it's really meant to be able to kind of come to, sit down with, read a little bit, digest it, integrate it, then come to again and just you revisit the book. And even after I wrote it, and edited it and did all the illustrations, I needed a break from it. So months went by and I didn't pick it up for a while, and I was just talking to people about it and didn't really look at it. And I've gone through some things in my life personally recently and revisited the book that I wrote, and I'm learning from myself again. And it's just such a resource. I appreciate it as an actual reader, but it's also just such a great work of art that I was able to produce. For me, I'm really proud of how it turned out. So thank you for acknowledging that. Mm-hmm. And the classes I have, so the curriculum, EMMT curriculum, Elemental Manual, Meridian Theory and Techniques, they illustrate specifically detailed information from the book. It's just the next level. They're long classes for each element, 16 credit hours each, and credentialed with NCCAOM right now and NCBTMB, so different professional disciplines can get credit for them. Talk therapy can usually get credit for them if they write a little blurb about what the course was about in credentialing renewals. But the major courses on each element really are comprehensive, diving into the anatomy and the physiology of the elements, overlaying polyvagal theory, overlaying my treatment theories I've developed, giving acupressure techniques that you can teach to your clients that you have that's similar to tapping or Jinshin Jiu-Jitsu that people use, or the emotional freedom techniques, things like that. and also an understanding of a deeper understanding of what your clients are physiologically and somatically going through. I do have a class on the actual book that's 4 credit hours, and that class actually it's adjunct to the book. It's not like an audio book. It references the book a lot, but it goes into more nuance of clinical applications. It helps explain the book better. The book is written pretty artistically just to stimulate mental processes in who's reading it and open doors of new ways of seeing the body. So the class actually gets down to a little bit more practical application and helps explain it much better, how you would use it. Within the class, I also orate one session of a 5-session case study that I did with a client who came to me with an orthopedic injury, and we got into this amazing healing space through the treatment theory and the techniques that I use that really help evolve him and his communication practices with the people in his life, and also gave him knowledge about how his body was holding on to and processing things. I also have the rest of the 5-session case study with that person in an adjunct 45-minute auditory experience that overlays the treatment theory, so you can actually hear me talk about what I was doing in clinic manually with the person, conversations that we were having, things that was coming up for him that he shared with me, with a schematic of the treatment theory, so you can kind of go back and forth and say, okay, she's talking about this, and then look at the actual treatment theories and how I'm practically applying it in real time. So it's really a guide of how to use it in your clinical practice, really applicable for physical therapists, occupational therapists, orthopedic medicine, primary care, but also applicable for talk therapists, because it really gives you that detailed nuance of what a session like this might mean to a client that you have, and what might open up in that client through the manual and energy work that a manual therapist might be licensed to do, that you could refer to and work with, and how that might make your sessions in your clinic much more fruitful for both you and the client, and really get to a more sustainable way of healing and transformation with those people without re-traumatization. So that's another really big tenet of what I teach, is aligning the body's energy systems with the knowledge of the polyvagal theory to help support the flow of energy that talk therapy can elicit. So you're not just re-traumatizing people, and people have a much more gradual, non-traumatic process in their healing experience, whether it be on the table with a manual therapist or in a talk therapy session.
Mm-hmm. I'm just impressed at the comprehensiveness of not only the book, but the adjunct class and just everything that you've put together. I'd really be curious to see, with all the experience you have on merging these two areas and bridging them together and bringing something really powerful to many different fields, where do you see this going in the future? What is this in itself creating a bridge for that will help transform healing in these different communities?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I really want this curriculum and the book and the theories that I'm presenting to really bridge the gap and demystify the beauty of, and the simplicity. It seems really complex, but I try to distill it into a simple form. The simplicity of the body system and looking at the body as a comprehensive system, and bringing in that sort of more creative, right-brained thinking into Western medicine, which has always been very linear and symptom-associated treatments and assessments. So really bridging that gap. I get a lot of feedback from Western medical professionals that they're really interested in Asian medical theory. They're interested in acupuncture and things like that. They just don't get it. They just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to them. So what I wanted to do with this curriculum is have it make sense, lift that veil of illusion that it just doesn't apply here, and welcome it in. I want to welcome in that the nuance and the framework and the mindset that it takes to really treat the body in a holistic way. That is the beauty of Asian medical theory, is that it does that very well, really crossing the boundaries here and blending them together. And I was just actually offered articles to be published in Acupuncture Today, and a column called Minding the Gap that will be started in September or October, and possibly as early as August. And I am really excited about that because that will be really anatomy and physiology based. So it will not only bring Western medicine into the fold, but it'll also be advancing and evolving the Eastern medicine and really merging those two and bringing the anatomy and the physiology more into the hands of people that have an Eastern medicine background and educating them on the clinical applications of polyvagal theory as well and the autonomic nervous system as well. So I'm really excited about that. And I would love for the work to get into the hands of nurses. And I was really excited when a nurse friend of mine told me the other day that they actually learned Reiki and they're taught about Reiki in their nursing program. And I don't know when that started, but that's amazing. And a lot of the work that I do is based on having that energy present as well. And Reiki is incredibly helpful into the situation. So really getting more of that patient-centered care, actually looking at the client from a whole perspective and applying that into clinical practice, whatever it may be, and using those treatment theories and looking at the five elements, looking at the tissue systems of the five elements and how they work together to help lift and support each other in a transformational process to heal chronic illness and chronic disease, whether it be mental or physical chronic illness. So that's really what I hope happens with the curriculum. It gets in as many hands as possible and as many people from as many different perspectives as possible read the book or take the classes, and it just shines a little bit of a light for them to take forward and use in their practice and apply it to however it best fits to suit them.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I would just encourage anybody that has any interest in what we've been talking about today to grab the book. And I'll put it links in the bio. It's right here. And it's just an experience. I think I was telling you about this earlier, just to be able to go through and just experience reading it. It's amazing. Well, Nikki, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. I'll make sure to put all of the important links below in the episode notes.
Thank you for the opportunity, Rebecca. I really appreciate you and your work as well. And I'm looking forward to future collaborations. I think it's really exciting and it's great to connect with people like you that really get it. And, we're doing the best we can, just like everybody else right now.
Awesome, Nikki. Well, thanks again for being here and look forward to chatting again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
If this was helpful to you or you know somebody that needs to hear this today, please share on your social media or email it to a friend. It helps bring this content out to the people that really need to hear it most. And as always, may you be the change you want to see in the world.